Hey there, I'm Chroma, and welcome to part 7 of Making an Abstract Adventure. Welcome back. Last time we had worked on the lineup aiming arrows for both of our characters in preparation for some of the abilities that they will have. This time, we have completed one of those, which is for the sphere character having the sort of lunge slash attack. And I guess the best way of explaining what it is to simply just show it off. So last time we had made these arrows to be able to aim, in this case, the lunge slash. So upon aiming in a direction, letting go will launch the character in that direction. So we have that now. And as well, yeah, so any direction, getting launched in it, up, down, diagonal, all of that works in the air and on the ground. I guess by extension, you could like launch yourself downwards, but we could see wherever that might be useful. Actually, I guess launching into the ground could break like hatches or stuff, like thin platforms or something. Like I guess could be an idea. But anyway, so we have that as well. You can go from a lunge into a double jump, things like that. So everything's all working together nicely. Yeah, I guess we'll go and show how that's working behind the scenes. So first of all, having the actual script on our player here, circle lunge slash. And it's called the lunge slash because when we have better graphics for it, the sphere character is going to have like the sword that they attack with for their like basic attack thing, but they'll also sort of be holding it out as they fly forward, so that's why it'll be like a lunge slash. So we have 3 public variables here for the lunge time, lunge power, and lunge delay. Just 3 numbers that control the times of all this stuff happening. That were just fiddling until the numbers seemed right enough. So let's go into the code and show how that's actually working. So these public variables are what you just saw, then private variables getting references to the lineup script, the ridge body, and the player move scripts, then in awake actually getting those references, then having a public void lunge slash that is called by the circle main script, which gets a reference to both the player lineup and the circle lunge slash, and then in the update frame is calling that function every frame. Yeah, and all this does is looks at the player lineup script and is looking at that variable that we made earlier over here. This, yeah. Oh yeah, also, oh yeah, one thing as well I added to this. So first of all, this released variable is what we're looking at here. So if we have released having the arrow aiming thing, then we're starting this coroutine down here of wait to lunge, which I'll get back to in a second. But first of all, over on the player lineup, I've also added another variable called can aim. That'll basically be just for one big kind of if around everything for if we ever need to disable our ability to be able to do the aiming thing for whatever reason. So you just turn that to false and then we can't do the arrow thing. But anyway, so then over here, actually doing the lunge slash is done by first setting release to false, setting in can aim to false in this case, so actually doing that. So for while we're actually lunging, we can't aim at all, just making sure that works correctly. Setting the player move override thing to true that we've looked at on the player before. As well, one thing I don't think I mentioned, I've also added a boolean for no drag, which when changing this system to instead of using the transform but using the rigid body and by extension add force, then drag starts to come into play. So to combat that, well, not actual drag, this pseudo drag that we have here with just multiplying the x velocity by 5 every frame, but not the y velocity, just sort of combating that, because trying to do the air dash with this happening just makes things not work correctly because of the way that this is being halved every second, but this isn't. So while we're lunging through the air, temporarily disabling that. Yeah, back over here then. So setting it to true so that there is no drag, but then down here setting it to false again. Setting the rigid body's velocity to 0 so that the lunge is consistent, whether we're falling or getting launched up into the air, whatever. Just make sure that lunge is consistent. Then applying the force to actually launch them in that direction, which the player line up the arrow, dot transform, dot up, dot normalize. That's basically just getting its forward direction. So basically getting the direction that the arrow is facing, because that's the way that we want to launch, multiplying by the lunge power, and then making it use force mode 2D.impulse so that it's like an explosion force, like we've done with the jump and even the wall jump and all that sort of stuff. Then setting the player move to the moved here to vector 2.0 so we don't have that additional movement right away. Or we don't have that additional movement with the override. We're just having that explosion force, and then velocity changes after that aren't directed by the player move script. Then setting the gravity scale to 0 as well, so the lunge just works better with going in the desired direction that the arrow was pointing in. Then waiting a very small amount of time. I believe it was 0.15 seconds, so very little time, and then sort of undoing everything. So setting the gravity back to 1, setting the move direction in having it be the X component of the way the arrow was facing, but then multiplying it by 3 just seemed to be a number that worked. I guess I could make a public variable, but it's fine at this point. Just trying to get all this to work with it actually going in the direction that the arrow was facing was this works enough, basically. Then disabling the no drag, the override, and all of that. Then waiting a slight delay before we can use the launch again. So I used 0.75 seconds. This also works for combating, being able to, if you were aiming up, sort of timing it so that you kind of go under where we just were before you're able to launch again, so you can't just infinitely launch yourself upwards. So that's sort of combating that there, and it works fine. Then setting it to true so that we can aim again after that. So that basically goes over the script. It's not too long. There's just a lot of bit of nitty gritty stuff to get this to actually to work properly. But so that's basically it for how that's working. But one thing I did want to go over as well in this video is more stuff with the actual controls and other moves that we'll be making for our characters, because I haven't actually gone over that yet. I've kind of just been making this stuff on the fly, sort of. But I do kind of have the rest of the moves for these characters planned out, as you can see in a note document that I just pulled from the game design document that I have written up. That'll show later on, probably at the end of when we finished a small prototype thing. Then I'll have one whole video dedicated to showing that off or something like that. So for starters, this is going off a a controller input using, I guess, an Xbox controller as an example. But then sort of turning those keys into keyboard equivalents as best as possible. But definitely a controller would be the desired play style, I guess. So for both of the characters, using the left stick or the D-pad to move, using A to jump and double jump, as well as wall jumping for Q, the Q character, and then or dash when swimming. At some point, I'd like to have some kind of if you fall into a body of water, you can sort of swim. That might change when we actually make it. We'll see. I might try a few different things and sort of see what looks best. Using B to interact with NPCs, doors, levers, items, whatever sort of stuff that we make. That's also a different button than the jump button, because I know a lot of games, or older games, like to make the interact button the same as the jump button, and that can be problematic sometimes. But in this case, we're giving it its own dedicated button. So start or select a pause. Then Y to switch characters in last story. So the way that the sort of stories are going to work is that there'll be 3 like campaign modes. One where you're playing as Cal going through a story, one where you're playing as Q going through a whole story, and once you've beaten both, unlocking this last story where you're going through levels where they're both in the same like area and you switch between them to do stuff. That'll be like sort of near the end of the game ish, depending on how long the last story is. So then the Y button will be used to do that. So for most of the game, it won't do anything at the moment, but I think that's fine. It's good to not have too many buttons, not have things be too complicated, but yeah, so that's how we're doing things for now. Then for the actual character specific moves, so for starting with Cal, the circle character, using X for the sword swing, the basic attack there with the red hit to lighter thing. Then using the right stick to line up the air lunge slash whatever. Then it's done on release. So in this case, you lined it up in the opposite direction to where the arrow is, so it kind of feels more like a slingshot kind of thing. But there will probably be an option in the options menu to invert that for the people that want to do that. Then using the left or right triggers, that should have an R. Oops. Oh well. Okay. Using left and right to bounce, there'll be sort of a like a bounce attack that the sphere will have to like bounce and sort of get launched into the air, as well as like smash through weak platforms, I guess. So actually, yeah. So then probably the air slash won't do that. That'll be just reserved for bouncing into the ground. I'll work that stuff more out when we are actually having all that stuff existing and making actual like buttons and targets that these things will use. Then using the left and right bumper to hold out a shield in the direction of the R stick. So if you're holding down the left or right bumper and then you use the right stick to aim, it'll hold out a shield in that direction to, I guess, like block projectiles or something like that. Also, a lot of these, you won't have all of these moves right at the start of the game. You kind of unlock them as the game goes on to have progression and all that sort of stuff. And then for Q, using A to wall jump, as we saw, it's kind of like a passive thing. X for like the staff, like a bow staff swing attack thing that goes in both directions. Using the right stick to line up a shuriken, and then it throws on release, so just like throwing a projectile that can hit like targets or enemies or whatever. Then using the left or right trigger to crouch. I'm also hoping, so crouching to get under like thin spaces, like having like this area right here, maybe go to like air ducts or something like that, as well as thinking we could have some sort of like stealth sections where you're actually like trying to avoid enemies that have like a line of sight, and crouching near something will make you like hide behind it or something like that. So hopefully there will be a decent amount of uses for that. And then also the left and right bumper to stick to walls. So as well, the Q character will be able to hold down a button to actually like stick to a wall indefinitely until you let go of the button. And yeah, I think that could also have more uses for kind of stealthing around. Yeah, I might try to also have a plan out levels in a way where you can go stealth-wise or choose not to, because I know there are people who like stealth games, people who don't, so we'll see how that goes when we actually start making levels. And yeah, but anyway, so that basically does that for the controls. And if there are a decent amount of like cases where some buttons do the same thing, I was trying to just have every button do something, but also keeping the controls simple enough. That's also why we're having certain abilities get unlocked as you go through the game, just to keep it more simplistic to start off, sort of easy to get into, and then slowly ramping up in difficulty. I haven't exactly planned like what moves are going to be unlocked in what order at different parts of the game, but that'll happen more when we're actually planning out levels and all of that. And then there might be some sort of incentive to revisit old levels once you have certain abilities, to find certain, I don't know, collectibles, or just being able to beat the level faster for some reason if there's like shortcuts, stuff like that. Again, when we get to actual level design, planning out our first few levels, then we'll be planning more of that. But anyways, that will do it for this episode. Next time, I'm gonna, I guess, be working on, now that we've done more with the circle character, we're gonna go back to the cube character and finish up the shuriken throw. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I could just say ninja star, but shuriken sounds cooler, I guess. But anyway, so that'll do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you around.